I mean, I've always been interested in nature.
Kind of Mother Nature's perfect animal, you know?
Seeing Nile crocodiles and being kind of terrified.
Welcome to the Nature Talks podcast. Welcome to Nature Talks podcast, the podcast where we explore biodiversity, conservation, and environmental storytelling. I'm your host, Erfan Firouzi, and today we have a very special guest, Maria. Maria is, of course, an environmental educator, conservationist, and the founder of the Little Rebels Nature Camp and Second Chance Wildlife Pakistan. Her work is, of course, in wildlife rescue and rehabilitation, and has transformed how young people engage with nature in Pakistan. She's, of course, also a National Geographic Explorer. And today, we'll discuss her incredible journey and how we can all contribute to conservation. Maria, welcome to Nature Talks.
Hi, Erfan. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here. I love this podcast. I love the kind of work you do, and I think that I'm so excited to talk about my work here with you.
Thank you so much. That's amazing. So we'll get right to the questions. So you have, of course, dedicated your life to conservation. Can you tell us about your journey and what inspired you to start Little Rebels Nature Camp?
So I think my journey started really early in my life, and I didn't really know it back then. But when I was 6 years old, we took a family vacation to South Africa. And, you know, my dad, who had always been super into wildlife, it was the kind of vacation where we kind of stayed in like tented camps and safaris, and we just kind of spent all of our time in the wild. And, you know, for someone so young at that like tender age, you know, seeing something as magical as just a herd of elephants crossing the road, it just changes your whole perspective on things. And, you know, growing up, I was super exposed to nature and the outdoors because I grew up on a farm and we were always surrounded by lots of wild animals. Just, you know, it was just very exciting for me as a child. And I think that is really what kind of, you know, instilled this love for wildlife deep within me and made me super sensitive to it. And that's kind of why I started Little Rebels Nature Camp also, where we kind of focus on kids, because I feel like, you know, I became a conservationist because of those childhood experiences I had with nature and wildlife. So I feel that if I can give kids who live in urban areas or, you know, if I can give them that same experience of, you know, interacting with wildlife and the outdoors in like a safe space, maybe they're going to grow up to be conservationists too. And, you know, I always think that it's not necessary they become biologists. They can become lawyers and policymakers and presidents and prime ministers. And, you know, wouldn't it be great if we had people in those fields being super sensitive towards nature? So that's definitely where my inspiration came from. I think a lot of it is from my own childhood and how, you know, me being so young and experiencing all those like wonderful things that the planet has to offer really changed my perspective on things. I really want to be able to offer that to children around the world now.
That's wonderful. I mean, you mentioned a lot of amazing things when you were talking. One of the aspects is, of course, you know, this is such an incredible story because we see here how, you know, scientists, how conservationists like yourself are fueled by that curiosity they have been exposed to in childhood, getting connected with nature. And, you know, the way you mentioned is something I'm very passionate about, that you don't need to be a biologist, you don't need to be a naturalist, you don't need to be environmentalist. You can be anything on earth, but still be connected with nature, still have a role in conservation. And that's something which is very unique. And of course, often the best conservation efforts come from passionate individuals like yourself who see a problem and decide to take action. And, you know, I did the same thing for the first time when I saw, you know, a tortoise, a wild Persian tortoise cross the road. And then I realized that I didn't see them ever again, showed that they're reducing. And your work is, of course, a testament to the power of grassroots movement in environmental protection.
Oh, for sure. I think like what you said about like people not being in this particular field to care about nature, I really truly believe that, you know, if we are going to save this planet and save all this biodiversity, it needs to be like this joint effort where everyone comes together. It can't just be the scientists. It can't just be the biologists. We all have to do it. It kind of is one of those things that, you know, has to be like an overall worldwide effort. And it's like, it has to be teamwork. otherwise. I mean, that's just the way it's going to work, you know.
Exactly.
And I think that's why, like, a huge part of my work, I do work with rural communities and indigenous people, because I truly feel like what's really missing is this, like, there's this huge gap between the indigenous knowledge, which is so amazing, and what's actually being adapted into actual, like, policies for human wildlife conflict. So I definitely think one of the huge things that we're doing wrong in conservation is focusing on just that. Oh, it's just the conservationist job. The scientists are going to handle that. No, it has to be. It has to be all of us. You know.
Exactly. All of us are in this together, and the fact that they have
Yeah.
this curiosity, work with the indigenous community. Because I mean, who is better connected to the land, to the nature than indigenous communities? I cannot think of any other group. They know of remedies. They know how to connect with their roots that we don't know ourselves. So, yeah.
I also think these communities are the ones that are more affected by human wildlife conflict, because obviously if you're what the case in Islamabad where I am in Pakistan is that we are right on the edge of a national park, which is Margalla Hills National Park, and we have megafauna like leopards and wild boar and all sorts of things. And obviously people who live in the city are less affected by any kind of conflict as opposed to those people who live on the fringes of the actual national park. And those are also the people that have, less, they don't have enough to actually defend themselves against those issues. So I think when we talk about human wildlife conflict, I think the right area to talk about is those rural communities that are actually living with this conflict on the daily.
Exactly, and how they have still, learned to live with them and connect.
For sure, we have so much to learn from them.
Exactly. And you work closely with young people, especially to foster a love or curiosity for nature. Why do you think it's so important to engage youth in conservation efforts, and what strategies have been the most effective?
So I think, I feel that young people are the future. I mean, there's us and there's the generations above us. But, when you're at that age that, the kids that I teach from 7 to 12, they're at this age where they're just so curious about everything naturally. I mean, I don't even have to convince them to be interested. They're naturally so excited to kind of learn. All they need is kind of a safe space to kind of interact with these things. And someone to answer their questions and kind of nurture that spark of curiosity. And that's really what I focus on, is just, there's no wrong questions and there's no wrong answers, and we're just all having a good time. I think what's important is, I found that in schools, when they teach science, they make it so boring. Nobody really remembers and nobody really cares. What I do with Little Rebels Nature Camp is we kind of teach everything that we teach through a series of games. So we'll have like a game of tag, except it's going to be extinction tag, where if you get tagged, you're an animal that's about to go extinct and you have 10 seconds and someone has to come and save you. So it's just as simple as putting a spin on very regular, everyday kinds of games. And kind of making it enjoyable for kids, because at the end of the day, I mean, if they're going to think of this as math or like English or any other kind of regular subject, they're not going to enjoy it. And if they're not going to enjoy it, then they're definitely not going to learn anything. So a big part of what we do at Little Rebels is just making nature education and learning about wildlife super fun and super engaging, and making it a safe space for kids where, they can count on our team to make them feel safe and comfortable around the outdoors, and just, they're looked after, their questions are answered, and they can honestly just create great memories and have an amazing time, all while being around nature and the environment. So that's really what the mindset is towards it. I think young people are the future of conservation. That's just how it is in the world. With the older generation, we're seeing with all the mistakes that the older generation has made. I myself find that I'm a young person, and I think the perspective that we have towards the issues that the world is facing is completely different from the older generation. And I think that really needs to be taken into account when working on policies around climate change or human wildlife conflict, biodiversity conservation. That perspective is really important, because we're the ones that have to live with the world that the older generation has left behind. So it's definitely important that we need to be heard. What we say, what we feel needs to be heard. And that's kind of what I do with Little Rebels Nature Camp. I just want to make sure all those little voices are heard.
That's absolutely amazing. Young people are, as you mentioned, the future of conservation. And by empowering them early on, we can create a generation that values biodiversity, and of course actively works to protect it. That's a dream for the planet. That's what Earth dreams about. And of course, education and hands-on experience are key in, of course, making that happen. Because I mean, even myself, I don't like working on theories and labs and whatnot. I want to be there out in the natural world, exploring. And I think it's the same for all of us.
Of course. I mean, there's no joy in having a science textbook and, learning like really random things in the most sad, monotonous kind of way. There's no actual real world connection. And I feel like that's another really important thing that's being missed here in Pakistan. Like, I'll give you an example. So I went to a private school here in Islamabad, and our books were all Oxford and Cambridge. So there was no kind of connection to actual like science in Pakistan, if you know what I mean. Like, for example, when we studied the food chain, we would study something like, grass is eaten by the zebra is eaten by the lion is the top predator. But you must understand that these are animals that most kids in Pakistan will never see in their lives, or maybe they'll see them in a zoo, right? They're not going to actually see them in the wild. So that connection is, that context is really important. I think instead of that, instead of the lion zebra dynamic, if we taught kids about maybe jackals and leopards, when they go out or when they're on their way home from school and they actually see a jackal, they're like, oh my God, and they're able to actually make that connection. I think it's so important to be able to connect the dots between what we learn at school and what's happening in the real world. And I think that's really missing when conservation and education is not given that kind of context that it desperately needs. I mean, it needs that context for kids to be, or anybody to actually be able to connect it to what's actually happening,
Exactly. That's something which we truly lack, it being engraved in our lives and in our education system is something that we don't personally have. I mean, I also went to a British school, and they do cover on the theories of climate change, but it doesn't mention, okay, how can it affect us? What are the uncertainties, or so on. They never, let's say, take us on a field trip outside in the field. Let's say you are going to live in Dubai, you live in Pakistan, you live in so and so country. This is how you will be affected. This is how the natural system around you works, and that's something, of course, which you unfortunately lack, which is sort of sad. But I guess it must be something that we as conservationists, as educators, must empower ourselves to bring upon that challenge and that solution to it. So now, of course, talking about Pakistan, as you mentioned, I know it has got a huge diversity, a huge and rich and diverse ecosystem, but also, of course, faces numerous environmental threats. So what are the biggest conservation challenges the country is currently dealing with?
So, Irfan, I honestly think that the problem here in Pakistan is that people don't even know what really there is to protect, right? I mean, you can't protect something you don't care about, and you can't care about something you don't know about. So, we're a huge and diverse country, and when I started my blog on Instagram, I got lots of messages from my friends saying, oh my God, I didn't even know we had this wildlife in Pakistan. I thought we just had lizards and wild cats. And I was like, oh my God, are you guys insane? So I think the huge issue is the lack of awareness, because obviously if nobody really knows, nobody's really gonna, do anything to protect it. They don't even know that it's in danger as such, And honestly, I was out in the mountains over the weekend, and I was just looking at various species of plants along the way, and there was a lot of littering and a lot of pollution up there because it's a popular tourist spot. And I was telling my husband the same thing, that there's going to be species in Pakistan that we haven't even discovered yet, but they're going to go extinct before we even discover them, and we'll never know they even existed. And that's actually something that makes me really sad about the kind of issues that we're facing in Pakistan. I mean, we are on the front lines of climate change. I mean, we are having floods and droughts and all sorts of horrific extreme weather events. But there's also, apart from the climate change, there's also issues with the mindset of the people. and I'm Pakistani myself, not saying anything about Pakistanis. I think it's, it's not so simple, right? Because a lot of the country is below the poverty line. And then if somebody, for example, doesn't have food on their plate, you can't tell them, hey, why don't you come and, help me save this animal? They're going to be like, well, I'm starving to death. My kids are starving to death. So I don't think that I really care about this animal, right? So it is a bit complicated in that sense, because conservation isn't a standalone thing, right? It kind of connects with all of these issues, and it's definitely intersectional. And then there's huge issues with the human-wildlife conflict, because, for farmers in rural areas where, the biodiversity is really concentrated, there's a lot of conflict. For example, we have porcupines, which will go and destroy crops. So if you would ask me, how do we save these porcupines? I'm like, well, we're not going to go and tell any villagers that, I know that because of this porcupine, you and your family aren't getting enough food to eat, but please don't kill it, because that's not going to work. So it's definitely one of those things that's more complex, and it has layers, and it's not something that can be approached as a black and white thing. There's lots of gray areas in that. And I think the best thing that you can really do is like compromise. And I think a huge part of that comes from understanding where people are in their lives, and kind of not, being very aggressive with your approach. I think you must show the people, as a conservationist, that you care about people also, because conservation can't actually happen without people. Conservation is in fact all about people. The animals are kind of, the byproduct of people caring about them, So, there's huge threats here in Islamabad, where I'm based. We have Margalla Hills National Park, as I mentioned previously, and currently the park is under threat because there's apparently going to be a chairlift built there and a tourism center and all of that, which is illegal, but because of, certain issues with the government or corruption, it's still going through. So those are things that are really problematic, because as a conservationist, particularly as a young conservationist, sometimes you might feel that really the whole country is against you and you're alone in your like standoff to protect the environment. But I think what's really important to remember here is that even you can't fight every battle, and that's something that I learned growing up a bit. When I was younger, I kind of wanted to save the world, but when you grow up, you realize that you can't fight every battle, but the ones that you can are definitely worth it. So I've picked wildlife education as my field for that purpose, because I feel like that's where I can make the most impact. I think that, okay, this generation is doing what they're doing, the government is doing what they're doing. I can't stop that. I can't stand against the government, and I can't, there's to an extent, I can't really stop all of it, right? But what I can do is I can change the minds of the youths, that when they grow up, they don't make the same mistakes, and, they don't have their next generation wondering how to stop them, So that's my approach on it. There's definitely lots of issues, but you have to stay motivated, because there are people that care, and you have to kind of, if I'm not going to care, who's going to care? If all of us just give up caring, then that's it's going to be the end of conservation, right? So we might be a few people, but we're strong and we have impact. And if we use our gifts of wildlife education and wildlife knowledge wisely, then we can definitely make a huge impact.
Exactly, that is all bound to the understanding. That's a great challenge, and of course that's what you're doing is a great breakdown of the challenges, and because when we look at it at the end of the day, I have seen that issue myself, that people have lack of understanding. I have gone and presented specimens or talked to people in Dubai where it was a COP28, and they were shocked to know about the species that exist there. And it doesn't matter if I live in Dubai, if I live in Australia, if I live in Antarctica, every single animal in this whole chain of the biosphere at the end of the day, affects each other. And if it affects the ecosystem, in return, it's going to affect other, Earth systems as well. And that's something which you don't understand, And talking about the crested, the Indian porcupine that you mentioned, I've also seen how much havoc they can, put on farmland and crops, especially like they love, melons and stuff. So, yep.
That's so true, and I think that you're absolutely right that the awareness and that knowledge is really lacking, because we tend to, we get educated and we go abroad and all sorts of things, and we tend to leave rural communities out of conversations about conservation. And it's never going to work without those communities, because they're the ones living on the front lines. That's why my National Geographic funded project actually focuses on a school that's for underprivileged children and orphans in a rural area, because those are the people that actually need those skills and those tools the most. And we just need to be the ones to kind of, with all of our knowledge and learning and higher education and what all, we need to be the ones to kind of go there and equip them with that and give them those tools to actually handle it or deal with it or feel safer around wildlife and kind of change their perspectives on it. That's our job.
And I mean, this whole conversation perfectly matches with the next question, because as human population expand, we are blasting in numbers. Wildlife habitats shrink, leading to conflicts. So how do you personally think that we can approach mitigating human-wildlife conflicts, and what role do you think education plays in these efforts?
I think that, and I've mentioned this before, that the huge thing in mitigating human-wildlife conflict is changing mindsets. It's actually, there's a huge fear of most of these animals, and that's why they're being killed. And, people might not admit that they're doing it out of fear, but ultimately it is the fear that, they don't know about this animal. They don't know what it's going to do. They've never seen it before. All of these things, that fear is what leads to people oftentimes killing animals. And I think education is the main important thing, and childhood education in particular, because it's very hard to change mindsets at a certain age. Even you and I, Erfan, the age we're at now, it's quite difficult to change our minds, because we're quite solid in, things that have made us or shaped us. But when you're young, you're just like a sponge and you're soaking up all the information. And that is the time that I think it's super important to kind of, get that important education and knowledge in about how to handle human-wildlife conflict. And I think that the answer to mitigating human-wildlife conflict is actually ultimately education and awareness. And we see this all over the world, where people go into workshops in rural communities and they, do all sorts of classes for the people there, and they kind of explain to them the benefits of those animals. So ultimately, it really is just about the awareness and the understanding. And, that's what's going to create that sensitivity within them, or that understanding to live in kind of harmony with these animals. And I think it's kind of, I think at some point rural communities worked really well with wildlife, and everything was kind of in order, and they were living in harmony many, many, many years back. And I think since the human population has expanded and we've started to kind of encroach into the wildlife habitats, it's kind of caused all of these animals or this wildlife to kind of act out of balance. And that's what's causing all of this conflict. So what we really need to do is restore and maintain that balance. And that comes from respecting an animal as a living thing, and understanding that, I tell this to people all the time, and they're like, oh my God, there's a snake in my house. What do I do? And I'm like, give it some space. It's going to probably just leave. It's probably looking for the exit out of your house anyway. You just give it some space, respect the animal. Don't approach it. Don't, corner it. Don't be poking and prodding it. So a lot of working with human-wildlife mitigation, as I mentioned, human-wildlife conflict mitigation, sorry. As I mentioned before, it is intersectional. You have to kind of, keep in mind who you're talking to in terms of, their socioeconomic background, their financial situations, their circumstances in general. I mean, in Pakistan, we have so many issues. So you can't, tell people that it's okay if you don't have food on your plate, but please save this animal. That's never going to work. So you do have to come from a point of understanding of these communities and what they're going through, what are their current issues, which animals are actually causing them problem, and then also offer them that understanding that we know that this is problematic for you, and we are not going to blame you or make you seem like savages or, inhumane for killing these animals in the past. It's okay because you didn't know any better. So I feel like a huge part of making this work, and I know this because I've been trying to do this for many years, and it's definitely trial and error, but I think you just, because you are in a position where you have more knowledge or more skills, you need to be in the position of being approachable in the way that they don't feel like you're coming and kind of telling them that everything they know and do is wrong.
We have a lot to learn from them. But we can get in and we can tell, okay, these are a few proposals we have of how you can deal with things, and we can motivate them in a way. Of course, we are not disrespecting their knowledge, because they have a vast amount of knowledge when it comes to that. And we can say that, of course, finding balance between human needs and wildlife conservation is one of the biggest challenges globally. And yeah, I think the key part in which we are not doing enough is, of course, education and community engagement, which can help people coexist with nature rather than just work against. And of course, for everyone listening to this, every one of us know that if you all have a pet at home, a cat, a dog, a fish, even an insect, you will come and realize that we think that animals are just, brainless beings. When in reality, they have unique personality. They are smart in their own ways. And I'm telling you, the same way that every human is unique, every animal is unique. And that's the beauty of nature. And of course, when we see it, all the situation, conservation work is tough, but it's also incredibly rewarding. So, talking about that, Maria, can you share a success story that has inspired you to keep going?
Oh, wow, that's a tough one. I have to start from the beginning all over. But, when I was younger, I knew I wanted this. I think when I was 12, I sent an email to Austin Stevens, who's, you might have seen, like the herpetologist on Nat Geo, was it Animal Planet, and he used to like run around, catching all these wild snakes and all of that. So I sent an email to him, and it's a hilarious email now that I read it, actually. And I sent him an email because nobody in my family everyone was like, okay, you like snakes, but all right, like, stop making it such a big deal. You can, do something realistic, right? And I sent him this email. It's hilarious. Don't laugh at me, Erfan. I know it's really funny. I wrote, "My name is Maria. I am 13 and I am from Pakistan. I'm a huge fan and I love snakes, but I don't know how much. I'm going to get some snakes, but I need your help since there are no herpetologists or reptile vets here. I want to be a herpetologist. You are my inspiration. You probably understand. I read on your Wikipedia that you were my age when you started liking snakes. Talking to a herpetologist has always been my dream, especially one like you. I hope you don't think that I'm some stupid kid and don't reply. Everyone tells me I can't be a herpetologist. I need your help to show them how much I love snakes. You are my only hope. This is the only way to prove how much I care. Please reply. This means a lot to me. You are my role model and example, so I can show my parents that everyone that likes reptiles doesn't die. I want to be just like you, traveling the world and photographing some of the most beautiful snakes. Sadly, my family thinks that I'm incapable of doing so, and if I can't take care of these snakes I'm getting, I'll just prove them right, and all my hopes and dreams will be destroyed. I can't do this alone. Please help me. I love snakes too much to let them go. Please reply when you see fit. This is really important to me. My career is in your hands." So I was clearly very, I was in this position where, obviously my parents were greatly concerned that I wanted to work with like venomous reptiles, and, they were obviously really concerned about my safety. And I kind of took this as oh my God, all my hopes and dreams and all that. Obviously I was like angsty. I was 13 years old. So, but, that's where I started really. And it was really difficult growing up, because I kind of maintained this approach that I definitely want to pursue this, and I know it's going to be hard, and there's no good universities that offer zoology as a degree in Pakistan. Make sure that kind of just be dedicated and be motivated and passionate, and in that direction, even though I was hearing all these things from everybody, even my family, even though it was well-meaning. At that time I didn't know it was well-meaning, but as the time passed, I was really just pushing in every direction, Erfan. I was like, I want to do this. Something has to work. Something's got to give, right? I have to be able to get somewhere. And by the time I finished high school, which was in 2020, it was COVID, and all the universities, all the borders, everything was closed. So I was like, okay, I'll take this year to kind of figure out what to do and how to approach this, because by the time that the borders opened, and actually, Erfan, I was planning on going to Australia, but the borders were closed for Australia for 2 years. And by the time they opened in 2022, I had started my nature camp. And I thought that, okay, I'm just going to do this nature camp for a while, and I'll see how that pans out. If it doesn't really work out, then I'll apply for university. And then, one thing led to another. During COVID, I also started working online with Conservation Optimism, with Reserva, with a whole bunch of places. And, since I started my nature camp, it just took off. I didn't realize there was even such a major gap for this kind of thing in Pakistan. And, I think that I started to feel so empowered by the impact I was making and the change I was creating. And it was the most difficult journey, Erfan. I mean, I had to really prove to everybody, especially because I didn't have a university education. I was right out of high school. I had to kind of prove to them that what I'm saying, what I'm trying to explain to you is worth listening to. And, I think that didn't really happen until I got recognized by National Geographic last year. I think that kind of Nat Geo stamp on my work and them funding my project really kind of solidified that. And that is, I think, I would say that my own success story is what keeps me motivated, because starting from where I read that email to you, where I was so desperate to just even get a response because I just didn't know what to do. Now I'm running a project that's funded by National Geographic, and I was in DC at their headquarters last year, and I was able to give a presentation on my work. I think what really keeps me going, every time a child finishes a course with us, the look on their face, the excitement on their face, that is like that little success story, just that hour of joy that they have on the closing ceremony, just the smile on their face keeps me going, honestly. Just seeing them enjoy, like we did a class where they had to kind of net all this like algae and moss out of a pond, and just seeing the excitement on their faces are fun. Like they took some tweezers and they were taking apart this algae and seeing all the organisms in it. And every time without fail, I see a kid laughing, smiling, being excited about the course. It just refuels all of that, burnt out energy. And I'm like, wow, I could never stop what I'm doing. And I know it was hard, and I took so long being a woman in Pakistan, working within the cultural restrictions we have, the restrictions I had from my parents living at home, all of the issues I had. I mean, being able to just persevere and keep pushing. And yes, it was difficult, but it wasn't impossible. And being able to get here, I think that success story, being able to kind of change these kids' lives. I mean, when I see them at these courses, I can literally see them making these core memories that they're never going to forget. And I think that is just priceless for me. I mean, I could literally watch like a highlight reel of all of these like closing ceremonies on repeat all the time, and I think that's what really would keep me going, because now I really do feel like I'm in the position where I'm creating real change, and that really does keep me going.
That's amazing. That's really a very, very unique and I mean, like I can relate to it, which is actually very, very funny in many aspects, because of course, I'm among those people who have been following your work over the years, and when you just vanished from social media and came back being a National Geographic Explorer, I was shocked personally. I'm like, what? And to be honest, I've also made a similar mistake or a similar experience writing to my role model, and I did the same thing, because when you are in a Middle Eastern or Asian country, they always want you to go for medicine, mainly medicine. And so on. Even my parents are like, you're not going to find a job in this, because they don't really know what the job is all about. What
exactly.
Yeah. That it's actually a scientist's work that leads to even human health and well-being. And I wrote a handwritten letter to David Attenborough, and that was back.
Yeah, I saw that.
That was a long time back. I think that was at least 5-6 years back. And I wrote to him, I'm a huge fan of your work. I've been updated with almost all your documentaries. I've got many of your books and so on. And my parents want me to go for medicine, but I'm interested in biodiversity and so on. I want to know, what did you study, and what advice would you give? And to be honest, the way I wrote the letter, I was very proud of what I wrote, and I was really excited to get a reply from him. But at the same time, I would be like, he's not going to reply to me. This is such a childish, silly message, but then I got a reply. I was like, and his reply is very funny, It's like, dear Erfan, thank you for your letter. I'm so glad you're enjoying my programs. I cannot advise you on a career choice because I don't know you. Best wishes, David Attenborough. And it was so funny to read. I mean, like, I expected that, but then, my parents are like, see, he himself doesn't know what you're going to.
Okay, I think I forgot to mention while I was mentioning this whole letter to Austin Stevens is that he did reply.
Okay.
He replied to my email and he was very supportive and very understanding, and he tried to explain to me that my parents mean well and that I should keep at it, and that, you know, I can definitely do it, and that he believes in me, and, you know, I should just keep pushing and keep pushing. And I think actually getting that reply from him made me think, okay, you know what, I can't, like, I have to do this. I have to do it. Like, I just, you know, and I think I remember one time I was in A levels and my sister was talking to me and she was like, you know, why don't you consider like doing psychology? Because I did quite enjoy psychology actually. And, you know, I was thinking and thinking and thinking, and all year I was just thinking, what should I do? What should I do? Because it was my last year of A levels. And of course, at this point, there was no COVID. And, you know, she asked me at one day, she was like, so did you decide what you want to do? And just in that split second, like, I just spoke right from my heart. I literally looked at her and I said, Mariam, I think that if I don't do this, I'm never going to be happy with myself in my life. I have to do it. Like, I've just decided. Like, and she was like, well, what led you to the decision? I was like, my heart. Like, I just can't. Like, you know, I just like deeply, like, I'm speaking from my soul right now. Like, I really feel like I see myself 20 years later being so dissatisfied with my decision and unhappy in my life because I didn't pursue what I loved. So I have to do it, even if it's hard, even if I don't know how, even if there's no job, there's no scope. I just have to do it. I'll just have to see what happens. You know, I have to dive into it head first and just keep pushing.
Exactly, and that's what, again, that's what your story, you know, reminds us why conservation matters. You know, it's all these little victories, saving, let's say, an animal, restoring habitat, or connecting with your childhood hero. And he replied. Have you thought of connecting back with him again?
I have, you know, now Austin Stevens actually he's stopped doing his show because he's got Parkinson's now and he's not, you know, in the best state. But I actually, you know, back then it was such a big deal for me to email him and get a response. Yeah. And recently, you know, I was like talking to him on Facebook. Like, you know, it was like, it was just, so I guess, you know, things change obviously when you get older. And, you know, I did like reach out to him a few times and, you know, we did talk back and forth. He's not very active on social media now, of course, because he's quite old now and he's got his Parkinson's also. But I do reach out to him from time to time. But, you know, Erfan, it's a great idea for me that you've given me, that I should send him a message about how he really changed my life. I think he'd like to know that. And then when I was 15, I actually somehow it was complete coincidence that I met this herpetologist in Pakistan. My dad met him at some friends gathering and he mentioned in front of his friends, oh, my daughter wants to be a herpetologist. And this guy was like, oh my God, I'm a herpetologist. And he was this quite old man from Venezuela, and he's not Venezuelan, but he was based there, and he was here in Pakistan to do an ecological impact survey for one of the dams we were making. And he was like, oh my God, I'm a herpetologist, I want to meet your daughter. And my dad invites him over, and this guy, Steve Gorzula, who anybody who's listening who's super interested in herpetology might know him because he has some frogs named after him, species that he's discovered. And, you know, I met him at that age when I was really struggling and I just didn't know which way to go. And he was like, oh my God, you can do this. I have faith in you. I know you can do it. And he went back to Venezuela. He came back a year later and he brought me a microscope, a signed copy of his book, and a dissection kit. And I think, Erfan, that for me at that age, like, I think that really changed things for me also. Like, having somebody like that who's so well achieved in that field, believing in you so much, it was just crazy. And then he went back to the US after that. He was based in Virginia, and he continued over email to mentor me and guide me and send me all sorts of things and opportunities and everything, just over email, because he was quite old, so not very tech savvy, but he was so active over email. And then last year when I went to Virginia, I met him after 10 years. And it was just the most insane reunion. I mean, we just like gave each other the biggest hug, and I just told him about how much he's changed my life. And he handed me a book. It was a field guide to snakes that his mentor gave him back in the 60s, I believe. And he said he wants to pass this down to me now, and that I should pass it down to whoever I mentor. And I thought it was such a magical and special moment, because that is also a man that really changed the trajectory of my career. And I think here I would like to emphasize how important it is to have a mentor. I think, having the right kind of mentor can really like make or break things for you and really change your life. So I really try to be that person for any child from Little Rebels who comes to me later and their parents are like, oh, she wants to be a zoologist, tell us how we can do that. And I really try to be that person for them because somebody was that person for me and it changed my life. So I really want to pay that forward.
That's absolutely amazing. I mean, again, you are a huge example that everyone who are listening to this must know, that you are a huge example of a person who has followed his dreams and never given up. Those are two aspects that can make you achieve the things that you want, and I think you're being a master at that, to be honest.
I really do think it does pay off. Like all your hard work eventually pays off. You just need to like persevere and kind of just, keep at it. Like you just have to, if you love something so much, how can you see yourself live a life without it?
That's what, and when you connect, when people like me and you connect, we can see how the stories are similar, how one motivates the other. I've been truly motivated by your work, how amazing your educational initiatives are. And, the same way you got appreciated by your mentor, then a couple of years later, I also again wrote another letter to David Attenborough and attached a couple of pics. And this time he wrote back to me and he's like, thank you for your letter and all you and your pupils have done to awaken people to the pressures facing our planet and how we can save it. And that was just like a mind-blowing experience. So yeah,
of course, somebody like that appreciating your work is just amazing. It really feels amazing because I think something that's really common across all conservationists is imposter syndrome. We end up thinking that, oh well, I am doing things, but am I doing that well? Am I really doing it? Am I really that good? And I think that's a very common feeling across all conservationists. And I think that's why it's super important to have somebody that kind of, appreciates and reassures you during your journey. And I try to be that person for people younger than me now that are in this field, because somebody was that person for me. And I can't state how important it is. I mean, I really feel like if I hadn't interacted with Austin Stevens and Steve Gorzula, that I wouldn't be here today because I needed that support. And I mean, you wouldn't imagine Steve mentored me over just email for 10 years, Erfan. Like, I mean, for 10 years, he was constantly like, what are you up to now? How are you doing? Here are some worksheets. Here's this, here's that, here's some opportunities. And he would give me homework and he would give me, and it means so much. Like when you're a young person and you feel like, it's you against the world, you just need somebody in your corner. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a family member. I mean, for me, Steve, who was all the way in Virginia, halfway across the world, really made that difference for me. So you just need someone to believe in you, honestly.
Exactly.
And you need to believe in yourself, because unless you believe in yourself, you can't convince somebody else to believe in you. So first you gotta believe in yourself.
Yeah, you're absolutely correct. Everyone who's listening to this, guys, make sure you follow your dreams, don't give up. That's the most important. And believe in yourself and have someone
100%.
to believe. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
of course, looking ahead, what is your vision for the future of conservation in Pakistan? I mean, what changes or initiatives would you like to see take place?
The way it is right now, it's very hard to change people's minds. Certain people who are in the government or in policy making and all sorts of things, it's a bit late to change their minds, but what we can do is kind of make sure that the people next in line have a different mindset, so we don't face the same issues, so the future generation doesn't have to struggle with the same problems we have. So I think that's why I'm working in wildlife education. My vision particularly for this, for the field that I'm in, wildlife education in particular, is to kind of get wildlife education into the mainstream curriculum all across the country. In public schools, it should be in the mandated curriculum. There should be a subject for it, whether that's wildlife education and wildlife conservation, or it's climate change education. But there needs to be some sort of topic, and it needs to be contextualized, and it needs to be put all across the country into the national curriculum, because it's never been more important as Pakistanis to care about our wildlife, our flora and fauna, because we are facing major threats. So I think my vision, very small kind of vision rather than the bigger picture, is for wildlife education curriculums to kind of be implemented across the country in all public private schools. It should be by law, like how it is, like math and English and Urdu and all of that. There should be a subject, wildlife and the environment, or wildlife and climate change, and it should be it should be obligatory to like study that in school. You should have to do it. And I think that is kind of like what my main vision is that I'm trying to get at now, trying to get into more and more schools and make sure that that kind of education is reaching everybody across the country and not just select schools.
Exactly. That's what I also agree with. To have wildlife, biodiversity, climate change, and its relationship with cities, with people, with the next generation, with youth present at schools and obligatory. My friends didn't like bio. There are too many terms to remember. What basically we mean in this case is, because nature is our path to connect with our roots, connect with the planet that we call home, and connect with the wildlife, is not just simply theory or what you're going to learn. It's about connecting with indigenous knowledge, connecting with your ancestors, connecting with your planet. So like it must be truly, let's say, a spiritual sort of study. Yeah.
For sure. And I think there's so many studies that like kind of talk about how good it is for your mental health to kind of connect with the outdoors. So it's not necessary that we're protecting the outdoors for the sake of the wildlife and the nature. It can also be for us. There's so many things, and I think people don't really understand this, is how important it is for just the human well-being to be in the outdoors sometimes, or to be connected with that, or to have access to that, to have safe access to it, to be able to enjoy it. It's super important. And I think
Now, of course, for all the listeners who are listening to this, we are, having now one of the most amazing parts. You'll love it. It's about the message, the advice coming from our speaker. So, Maria, this has been such an insightful conversation. So what would be your one message or advice for people who are listening to this?
I think I would just say, honestly, like, you must follow your dreams. There's no other way forward in life. I mean, you need to kind of fulfill what you feel like your calling is, because if there's something you feel so deeply and passionately towards, really nothing can stop you. I mean, there's roadblocks and there's all sorts of things. I mean, I mentioned so many issues that I had. I mean, my parents weren't even sure if they wanted to allow me to go to university, let alone work. I wasn't allowed to drive. There was many issues that I had, and I just thought that, well, there's no way, but there's always a way. You just have to kind of persevere and be persistent. I think that's the main thing, that if you have something that you feel so deeply towards, like, you have no reason to do yourself the injustice of not following that dream and not following your heart. You must do it. I mean, you owe it to yourself and you owe it to everybody to kind of follow your dreams and achieve your dreams and be who you want to be. And you can do it. Like, it might seem that you can't, but there's really nothing stopping you once you put your head to it. So I think that's what I would say, really.
So, Myra, of course, thank you for sharing your experiences and passion for conservation with us. And of course, for those who are interested, and I know there are so many of you interested to know who you all can follow and be in touch with Myra's work. And of course, you all can see those links in our description. So make sure you check it out. They're going to be amazing. And of course, once again, to all our listeners, thank you for tuning in. If this episode inspired you, please share it with someone who cares about wildlife and conservation, who you want to inspire to follow their dreams. And of course, follow Nature Talks on Spotify, our podcast, YouTube, and wherever you have found it and listening to it. And join us next time for more discussions on biodiversity, conservation, and our shared responsibility for the planet.
I mean, I've always been interested in nature.
Kind of Mother Nature's perfect animal,
Seeing Nile crocodiles and being kind of terrified.
Welcome to the Nature Talks podcast.